The Last Line is a completely free podcast, but takes a lot of time, effort, and hard work to make happen. So if you'd like to support the show, then please head over to patreon.com/The Last Line. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time you are listening to this podcast. My name is James Alban and you are listening to episode 13 of The Last Line. Thank you very much for joining me. If you're new to the show, then please do subscribe and leave a rating and review wherever you may be listening to the show. My guest this week is none other than British mountaineer Jake Meyer. Jake was the youngest Briton in 2005 to climb Everest at the age of 21. He was also the youngest Briton to complete the 7 Summits Challenge. Last year, he reached the summit of K2. K2 is the second highest mountain in the world, after Mount Everest, of course, and it is generally considered to be one of the most dangerous mountains to climb. It's known as the Savage Mountain. About one person dies on the mountain for every 4 who reach the summit. And the podcast revolves around this climb and the various attempts that it took to get there and the story of how Jake got to the top. And we start at the beginning with Jake's first dreams of climbing the Savage Mountain.
So I guess I had a dream about wanting to climb K2 almost since the day I summited Everest. And you'd think, hang on a minute, surely if you're standing on the top of Everest or coming down from the top of Everest, and that's when a lot of the deaths occur, surely you'd be thinking more about trying to stay alive rather than planning your next holiday. Not to mention the fact that normally when you're on a big expedition, all you dream about is actually going home,
right?
Not planning the next trip. It's not until you get home that you then start to get itchy feet. But coming down off the summit of Everest, I was 21, I had just climbed Everest, become the youngest Briton to do that, the youngest man in the world to complete 7 summits. I'd essentially achieved my life's ambition at the age of 21. And for so long I'd been focusing on that challenge and what success looked like, that I completely neglected to think about what would come afterwards.
Right.
And even on the way down from the summit, I started thinking, wow, I've got these tremendous myriad of emotions, of elation, of relief, of exhaustion, but there's also a certain amount of emptiness, a certain amount of is that it? Ultimately, I kept on climbing, and I don't know if I was expecting fireworks or a massive rush of adrenaline that would last forever or what from the summit, but you get to the top, you stand up there, you go, oh, this is a nice view. Let's take a photo, phone my mum, and then start heading back down. So there's a bit of an anticlimax to some of these big expeditions.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it a bit sort of underwhelming when you get, because you see you watch like the video view at the top of K2, and you're having a gin and tonic, and it looks cool because you're at the top of a mountain and stuff, but there's nothing up there, is there? So it's like. It's like when people go to the moon, it's like, why haven't we gone back to the moon? It's like, well, there's not.
we sort of learned everything we need to know about it. Yes, yeah, exactly. There's only so much dust you can scrape up. Yeah, it's purely just to prove that you can do it. And I think that's quite a nice analogy for climbing mountains, because let's face it, it's a pretty pointless thing to do in the first place. And I'm paraphrasing massively here, but of course, George Mallory was famous for having, when asked why would you climb Everest, because it's there. But actually he has a longer quote as to the reasoning behind it, where he seeks to do a little bit of explanation, and he essentially sort of says, you know, why would a man, of course in those days, but why would a person want to go and climb a mountain? Frankly, it's ridiculous, because we're not going to find mineral resources at the top. We're not really going to make necessarily huge scientific discoveries at the top. We're not going to find land that's fit for grazing. There's so many reasons why it's a pointless waste of time. And yet, for those who do it, it is such an inherent focal point and driving factor for probably a certain amount of sort of self-acceptance. And I'm sure a psychologist would have a field day with either me or any other mountaineer, because you have this ultimate paradox of it means nothing, and yet it means everything to the individual. It means nothing to humankind, but it means everything to the individual. And so, having done Everest, it was then a case of thinking, well, what next? And I was always slightly aware that there was potentially a perception, I think it's only got more so amongst perhaps the person on the street, that, oh, well, yeah, but if you pay $1 million, someone will carry you to the top of Everest, and it's only rich gits that do it, and so on and so forth. And trying to prove that, A, that's just fundamentally not true, but also that I was more than just potentially one of those people, that I could demonstrate that I was an actual climber, was an actual mountaineer, not just some thrill-seeking person who wanted something for my dinner party chat and a picture that looked good on the mantelpiece.
Although good dinner party chat.
It's not. It's quite handy. It's quite. I mean, unless it's just me and my wife, and she's quite bored of that as dinner party chat, as I'm sure you can imagine. So then it was a case of going, well, K2 is the obvious next thing for me. You're looking at something which is only a little bit lower, only about 250 meters lower than Everest, so still incredibly big, but a significantly greater challenge. So when I got to the top of Everest, this was 2005, I was approximately the 2,500th ascent. And that's about, the statisticians are going to love this, that was about 50 years after the first ascent, 53, first known ascent. And then within another 5 years, that number doubled. And within another few years since then, that number has doubled again. Now, I don't think it is going up. It can't go up exponentially, because I think the mountain can't really take any more, the infrastructure can't take any more, and the Nepalese authorities are starting to put some limitations on numbers and put more restrictions in terms of who can go to the mountain. But at that time, there had only been 300 or so people who'd done K2. So it was, almost a tenth of the number who'd done K2. And so I thought to myself, well, if I could do K2, not only would I be one of a very, very small number of Brits to have done both, but I would be one of just an incredibly small number of people who have done this, who've been to the top of K2, and it became a real focal point, and I describe it quite often as my North Star, as my pole star. Because it is this thing that has been there and has been constant throughout a large proportion of my life. So arguably since the 4th of June 2005, when I started thinking about it on the way down from Everest, to then getting to the top of it. So, we're talking 14 years, and certainly 10 years of properly trying. That almost every waking moment, every day, I would think about K2. It was almost this spectre that would haunt my dreams. I would imagine myself on the summit, especially after the first unsuccessful trip. I would have dreams where I did get to the top or wasn't getting to the top, and nightmares about that. But would always be bringing myself back to and slightly measuring my own sense of self-importance or self-acceptance on this focal point of K2. It became a challenge that defined me. And I recognise that part of my brand, whether I like it or not, whether or not I maintain and encourage it or not, is, oh yeah, that's Jake, he's the climber. My friends of my parents will say, oh, how's Jake? What has he climbed recently? It's just who I am. And I think all of us, we will have these brand descriptors put on us, depending on our passions and our jobs and our family and all these things, which is wonderful, and it's part of what defines us. But if you are therefore being described as a mountaineer, you are surely only as good as the last mountain you climbed. And if it was a mountain that you only climbed 20 or 30 years ago, then are you still justifiably a mountaineer?
Right.
So again, perhaps there's some sort of existential angst in that acceptance of who you are and what you represent.
And you wanted to be known as a mountaineer.
Yeah, there was definitely a sense of wanting to have some acceptance of he's not just somebody who's paid a lot of money, even if it came from sponsors, but paid a lot of money to go to the top of Everest because it's there, quote unquote. But actually, he's a genuine mountaineer, he's a genuine climber. I think it was probably a sense of wanting to potentially get a bit of respect within your own industry.
Yeah.
Now, look, goodness, I would be the first to admit that I'm not a particularly skilled or strong technical climber. And so in comparison to the people that I idolise, the incredibly experienced or strong athletes, the rock climbers, the alpinists, wherever they are, Brits or wherever they are from in the world, male, female, etc. I'm nowhere near. I'm not even the same mountain range as them, metaphorically speaking. But if you're then looking at actually just big mountains and people who are prepared to focus on those big hills, that there is a sense of someone going, oh, all right, he's climbed Everest, so what? Anyone with money can do that. But they go, oh, he's climbed Everest. Sorry, he's climbed K2. All right, fair dues. That's pretty hardcore, isn't it? And even if someone doesn't necessarily know why they think K2 is hardcore, that there is a sense of there's sort of a sense of recognition. Is it the second highest? Is it the highest? Some people still say, "Oh, is K2? Is that the one that's higher than Everest?" No, it's not. But some people do get slightly confused with K2 and Kilimanjaro. As someone might, it comes out in conversation. I tend not to run around going, I've climbed K2, but unless I'm trying to sell myself.
You got a T-shirt.
Yeah, I've got a story about that. But if someone finds out about it, and then often someone will go, oh yeah, my mate's climbed K2. And I'll be thinking, okay, so I know, not personally, but I know most of the names of the people who've climbed K2, especially if they're a Brit, because let's face it, there are only 7 other Brits who are alive who stood on the top of K2. 3 who climbed it but died on the descent. And they go, my mate, John Smith, and you go, I'm not completely. I don't recognise their name. When did they do it? Oh, they did it last year. That was when I was there. And then you eventually find out it was Kilimanjaro. Oh, are they the same thing? Well, not quite, but we can all dream. We can all dream.
So K2. Why is K2 considered a difficult? Because it's more difficult than Everest, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that. So certainly the easiest route on K2 is significantly harder and objectively more dangerous than the routes on Everest. Now, of course, there are routes on Everest that are more difficult to the easiest routes on K2. It sort of stands to reason, but the easiest way of getting up K2 is significantly harder than the normal ways of getting up and the easy ways of getting up Everest. So K2 sort of has this rather sort of strange list of epithets where it's not necessarily the supreme of anything. It's not necessarily the highest, obviously, the most difficult, the worst weather, the coldest, the list goes on, the most remote, but it falls pretty high up on so many of those lists that when you aggregate all of those things that basically make it tricky or dangerous or reasons why you may not want to go in the first place, there aren't many mountains around the world that would necessarily stand stand up to it in that sense. So yeah, there are mountains which are more difficult. There are mountains which have a higher death rate. There are mountains. Well, there's one mountain that's higher. There are mountains which are more remote. But when you gather all of those data sets in together, it does sort of push K2 towards the 4. And that's not to say that there might not be something that could equal it, or maybe slightly worse. But generally speaking, so hence why I would sort of refer to it as being widely considered the most difficult and dangerous mountain in the world. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination saying it is the most dangerous or the most difficult. So what are the kind of things that make it so? So firstly, it's incredibly remote. It's 120 kilometre, so 75, 80 mile walk to get to base camp. Mm-hmm. There's no other way in Other than that, you have to do that walk. It takes between 7 and 9 days, especially when you're acclimatizing and when you're going on your way up the mountain. Although on the way back, you still got to walk out. It is slightly quicker because I say it's downhill, but actually you just want to get the hell out of there. But also the acclimatization isn't so much a problem. Everest, in comparison, and I'm sort of slightly picking my statistics here, but for instance, on the north side of Everest, there's a metalled road that gets you to base camp.
Right.
So as a tourist, you can drive to 5,200 meters.
I see.
On the north side of Everest. On the south side, you still have to trek in, but on the north side, you can drive in, and people do that with mini travel bottles of oxygen and things like that to get their photo at Everest Base Camp. So it's a very long way to walk in. It's incredibly steep. Any picture of K2 that you see, I think anyone will recognise that if you were to get a person, or especially a child, to draw a picture of a mountain, that's what they would draw.
Right,
Essentially, they'd draw a triangle,
yeah,
and that's what K2 looks like, almost from any angle. It's every side of it is steep. All of the routes up the mountain average around 40 to 45 degrees. So whichever route you try and take, it is steep one way or another. And that includes the fact that when you get up towards the summit, actually you have a relatively gentler section called the shoulder. So by default, that makes the average of the rest of it slightly worse. Height, so it's 8,611 meters, so about 250 meters lower than Everest, and it says one of the 8,000 meter peaks. You are well up into what's known rather evocatively as the death zone, really above sort of about 7,500 to 8,000 meters. That's the point at which the human body cannot really acclimatize anymore. You're getting to the point where either you are having to be incredibly quick, not to mention the fact you are incredibly fit and strong, or you're using oxygen. Now, these days, most people do use oxygen on K2. Right. Traditionally, actually, it's had a relatively low usage of oxygen because it tended to be smaller teams. They didn't have the logistical support that teams on Everest might have, of having lots of porters and lots of Sherpas and equivalents to help stock the mountain. So, and of course, it tended to attract some of the best climbers in the world. So people were just naturally fitter and more attuned and more willing to give it a go without oxygen. And whilst you might think, well, hang on a minute, why would you try that? There are a few things that might lend you to think, actually, that's not a bad thought to try it without oxygen. Okay. Having said that, and as you can see sitting in front of me, I still have all my fingers and toes. And I quite like my fingers and toes, and that's one of the things that oxygen is particularly good for, is minimising the risk of or reducing the risk of frostbite.
Because it keeps your blood flowing.
Yeah, basically, it allows your body, or as you start to get cold, capillaries start to constrict. The body keeps the blood flow to the core to preserve the vital organs, and essentially is sucking the. I'm not a doctor here, so the terminology is not necessarily right, but it's sucking the blood away from the extremities, which is why people get frozen toes, frozen fingers, frozen noses, etc. So the oxygen helps that. It helps maintain the right flow of blood around the body. So it reduces that impact. So that's one of the other things on there. Weather-wise, the Karakoram mountain range, so sort of it's at the end of the Himalayas. Technically it's not part of the Himalayas, even though if you looked at a map, it sort of all looks like one big mountain range. But the Karakoram, it just suffers from very inconsistent, very changeable weather systems. It's not nearly as easily to predict the weather as it is in Nepal, especially in sort of the Everest region, where you have the sense of the monsoon seasons of coming up, monsoon weather systems of coming up through the Bay of Bengal, and therefore it's much easier to predict what's going to happen as a result of all of that. Whereas with that much more remote, where we are in the Karakoram, and the weather system is that much more changeable. The mountain itself, I guess, because of the steepness and the sort of the two most commonly climbed routes, so the Abruzzi spur and the Chezen spur, are a veritable sort of pinball alley of avalanche and rockfall every single day. So on Everest, you tend not to climb with a helmet. I think when I did it, and I did it from the north side, I didn't take a helmet with me at all.
Okay.
These days you might have people who wear a helmet on the south side through the Khumbu icefall, but some will wear helmets up top, but a lot of people won't. Everest, everybody, K2, everyone leaving base camp, you've got your helmet with you because of the dangers. As we speak, there are a couple of international expeditions trying to do a winter summit of K2. It remains to be the only 8,000 metre peak that has not been climbed in winter, and over the last week or so, 5 members have been evacuated specifically due to injuries from rockfall. So the dangers is absolutely there. And I got hit by, luckily, very small pebbles or bits of ice and things, but anything much bigger than, I don't know, an inch or so across, once that's gathered a bit of speed,
it's going to hurt.
Yes, it's definitely going to help. The helmet is going to be of limited use.
Yes.
Hopefully the helmet just keeps your head in one place, even if you have a hole through the top of it. It's a bit like the old flak jackets that they used to issue people in the army, before sort of plates came in. Is it wasn't to stop the bullets, it was to hold everything in when you'd been shot. And that's in the end almost what happens to you on that. The other thing is, and I guess it's in nature because of all the other elements, is because fewer people try and climb it, there is less of a logistical setup there. It is, again, because of the remoteness. You are having to do all the fixing yourselves in the teams. Everest has fixing teams, so they are there purely to fix, whereas the teams have to work together. So, I mean, that in itself is nothing new. That's how all climbing used to be done. But on Everest, that's now, for the last 10 years or so, that is now being done much better and in a much more sort of consistent way. Of course, it brings with it its own dangers and challenges. So when you start to bring all of those elements together, you get this mixture of remoteness, steepness, height, weather, technical difficulty, and then any human factors you want to add into that, and that's what makes it kind of tricky, a little bit cheeky.
You talk about. There's obviously like different routes up, and there's easier routes and there's more difficult routes. Is there sort of differing levels of respect that go along with the different routes? So if you say, I climbed this mountain using this route.
Yeah, I think there would be. I mean, again, you'd be getting down to the pedants or the people who who really understand, they know a lot about it. Whether or not they're armchair travellers and therefore they've read a lot about the mountain and various routes. And you say, oh well, I did it via I did Everest by the North Ridge, which is the route that I took, which is technically more difficult than the south side, and then absolutely someone else can come along and say, but you didn't do the Messner Direct variation, did you, or the Norton Couloir, or the West Ridge, and you're going, well, no, I didn't. I'm not saying I did the.
But I still.
That's more importantly came down. So I think there always is that element to it. But I think just generally within high altitude mountaineering, there can also be a certain amount of pretentiousness or questioning of the style in which people climb as well.
Okay.
If you were to take a real pure style, then it would be alpine climbing. And what I mean by alpine climbing is essentially you start at the bottom and you just go for it.
Yeah.
one push, off you go, carrying everything you need. To then you sort of have capsule style climbing and then siege style. And siege and capsule style is how most big expeditions are done on those big mountains. That you have a dedicated base camp, you're going up the mountain, setting up camps, coming back down again, you go up the mountain, ferrying kit, and so on and so forth. You're going up and down, up and down, up and down, constantly building yourself up, getting the right equipment and supplies up so that you can make that final summit attempt. So comparing whether or not you're comparing, Reinhold Messner and Peter Kabler in 1978 when they climbed Everest without oxygen, which was amazing, and of course at that time was such a leap forward in terms of what anyone suspected humans were capable of. And apparently even when they came down to base camp, the Sherpas that they still had, there were Sherpas there, were so amazed and surprised by this that they were sort of practically patting them down, the summiteers down, thinking you must have some sort of secret James Bond breathing apparatus on you that we can't see. Because even they couldn't believe that someone could get to the top, especially a non-Sherpa, a non-Nepali could get to the top without oxygen. To that point, they, everyone had used oxygen if they, who had summited. And then in 1980, Messner went back, did it solo without oxygen on a new route.
Right.
That is amazing. So really, and of course there have been one or two other just epic ascents. I'm trying to remember what year it was, so 1982, 1984, maybe it was a little bit later. Anyway, an 80s expedition on the Kanshung face of Everest, which again was an amazing expedition. So if you happen to be on any of those expeditions, really anybody else who's climbed Everest, it bows down humbly to you. But that doesn't take away from the fact that you still all share the fact you've stood at the top.
Yeah.
And judging the style in which you did it, I mean, of course, people will judge, but actually that's down to you and your ego and your...
Yeah. I guess what I was wondering is if there's a temptation on your part to just want to do the most difficult, just so you can say, how much does that come into it?
I must admit, and again going back to the sense that as of recording this, because who knows what might happen in the next few weeks, but the fact that K2 has never been climbed in winter and is the only 8,000 meter peak, when it falls, and I'm sure it will one day, that will be an amazing expedition. Whoever has climbed it in winter, it's one of the last greats for Himalayan climbing, which is absolutely incredible and epic. And that person, those people, on the assumption that they managed to get down safely, will always have that. So I'd be lying if I said I hadn't thought about it. But then about 3 minutes later, I go, but flip it, Nick, it's K2. It's difficult enough in summer. You'd have to be bonkers to want to do it in winter. And however bonkers some people might think I am, I also know my own limitations, or I can appreciate my own limitations. Not to say the fact it would be incredibly expensive to put an expedition like that together because of the dedicated nature of it. And frankly, I don't really want to spend 3 months freezing my whatsits off in winter on that mountain.
So you attempted it a couple of times before you made it to the summit, and I was sort of wondering if you could talk about those.
Absolutely. So in 2008, I had an opportunity to go to the mountain. I was signed up for a British team. Everything was looking good. We'd all had to raise a bit of money towards it, and probably about 2 months out, 6 weeks out, things fell through due to a number of reasons. Things fell through, and we weren't going to be able to go. And I switched on to another expedition. I went to the Tian Shan climbing instead, and that was great. But I remember being very jealous and very disappointed, obviously, because this was going to be it. 3 years after Everest, I wanted to then go and climb K2 and prove to myself and to anyone else who was interested that I could do it. And it fell through, and I was very disappointed. And I watched the various blogs and followed the expeditions as they went, thinking, God, if only I was there, that could be me. I could be climbing up to that camp and look at them and how well they're doing. And then on the 31st of July 2008, 20-something climbers set off for the summit of K2. Many of them made it to the summit, but within 24 hours, 11 died due to certainly the worst single disaster in K2 history. It's not the worst year.
Right.
1986, off the top of my head, they had 13 deaths. And 1995 was not a very good year either. But essentially from one sort of set of incidents, this was the worst K2 disaster.
And what happened?
So climbing up a very steep section just before the top, which is called the bottleneck, which, as the name suggests, is quite narrow, but it also is underneath an overhanging serac. So this towering piece of ice is the end of a summit glacier, essentially. And it started with one guy who there was a bit of a queue, okay, I mean, not quite in modern day Everest terms, but
Yeah.
a few people on the ropes. One guy unclipped to then climb around the person in front to clip back on. And as he did so, he slipped and fell.
Right.
And he died, but his body was visible and no one was quite sure whether or not he was still alive. So a number of people then went down to try and recover the body. Whilst they were then bringing the body back to Camp 4 at just under 8,000 metres, one of that team, a Pakistani climber, slipped and fell to his death, so that's 2 down already. Meanwhile, others kept on going towards the summit, and whilst they ended up summiting very late in the day. So I summited at 8 o'clock in the morning. These guys were summiting sort of 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was really late. And of course, the sun's not going to stay out for that much longer, so coming down in the darkness is difficult. Not to mention the fact that as the day warms up, that's often when things like the avalanches start happening. Things are thawing, and more to the point, this serac, this overhanging tower of ice, 100 metres high, really big, 100 feet high, chunks of it started to fall off. And some really big chunks of it fell off, and some of that swept a few climbers away who were on their way down, as well as cutting all the ropes. So you then have people stuck above this section, very steep section, with no ropes, no way of getting down, and it's getting dark. Some people tried to down climb it, some survived, some didn't. Others were caught up because they'd fallen above it. It was a perfect storm. It was I mean, this is the wrong phrase, but it was a comedy of errors. But it was just a list of lots of little things going wrong and them culminating in a huge loss of life. So there I am, sitting quite happily at home, watching this unfold, going, "Oh shit!" Right now, I'm glad that I'm not there, because who knows what would have happened. And been quite thankful for that sense. The strange thing is that many people will probably go, "Well, hang on a minute, surely that makes you go, this is ridiculous, there's no way I should do this." Having just observed this, not firsthand, but thinking that could have been me, or maybe that should have been me, does that make you think, well, I definitely want to do it? The strange thing was that actually, I think it sort of helped bolster the myth of K2.
Right.
And that sounds an awful thing to say, but part of the reason why it's known as the Savage Mountain is because of all the people it's killed, and in a strange sort of way, that was part of the appeal. Not directly because of that, because of the recognition of the mortality rate on the mountain, and therefore what that means for the difficulty and the danger. There's sort of a sense of well, if I can do it and survive, then that's an incredible achievement. Not to mention just statistically, it's pretty impressive, and it again, I think to me, the sense of risk, the sense of danger in these kind of expeditions and this kind of climbing, it is a big part of the allure and the attraction to it. Because frankly, if you remove the risk, if you remove the sense of danger, then you get just about every other sport.
Yeah.
It was,
and in a sense, the reason that people like me who would never climb a mountain, the reason we have respect for people who do climb mountains is because you've gone through this dangerous thing to get the danger is part of the thing that makes it so impressive to a lot of people.
The danger, frankly, is 100% part of the game.
Yeah.
It was I think it was Ernest Hemingway who said, "Mountaineering, motor racing, and bullfighting, those are the only sports. Everything else is just a game." Because these things, which, especially when Ernest Hemingway was doing it, in the sort of 40s, 50s, they were inherently dangerous, and a lot of people do it because of the thrill they get from that sense of danger. Now, this is where I hasten to add that I definitely do not try and do these things because I have a death wish. It is not the fact that I feel I'm at risk that makes me go, because frankly, I'm too much of a wimp and a bit of a pussy to to really do that. So it's a sense of, I appreciate it is a dangerous environment that I'm going into. I believe I can look after myself, maximise my chances, but probably most importantly, make the right decisions, control the controllables, be able to react to any uncontrollables, so that I don't become a statistics. I want to try and beat the odds.
Does a sort of worst case scenario, of something going horribly wrong and you not coming back, does that ever occur to you in your mind when you're doing it? Because I've been reading, you've seen like the SAS Who Dares Wins, Ant Middleton's book, and when he was in the SBS, he was like, I was the first man in, and it never occurred to me. He said, I didn't have an arrogance, I had a supreme confidence that I could do my job, and it never occurred to me that I'd be the one getting back on that helicopter.
Yeah. I absolutely subscribe to that.
Right.
I don't have that fatalistic sense of it might be me, because actually if you start thinking that, then why would you go? Why would you go in the first place if you honestly believe? Now, of course, I appreciate objectively that something could happen to me. Injury, rockfall, avalanche, death, whatever. Similarly, I could also get a really bad attack of diarrhea from food poisoning, and that could stop an expedition. But I think when you set off on these things, and ultimately when you set off on anything that's quite big and quite scary, whether or not it's a mental, physical, or metaphorical mountain, one of the best ways to improve your chances, but also just your own resilience, is to have a belief that you will prevail, that you can do it. It reminds me of something called the Stockdale paradox, which a chap called Jim Collins writes about in his book Good to Great, which is a fantastic sort of management leadership bible. But Stockdale paradox, and Admiral Stockdale was the most senior US. He was actually a naval aviator, but military person, captured by the Viet Cong by the North Vietnamese in the Vietnam War, and he was held in a prison camp for a very long time, something like 6 or 7 years, and he survived. And after he was released, people asked him, there were many who were captured at the same time of you or after you who didn't survive. What was it that made the difference? What is it that you've got that they didn't have? And he said, well, part of the trouble was that many of these people would be so optimistic about, we're going to be released or we're going to be rescued soon, which okay, fair enough, keep a stiff upper lip and believe you're going to get out, that they would say, we're going to get out by Christmas. And of course, Christmas would come and go. Oh, well, we'll get out by Easter, and Easter would come and go. I'll get out by my birthday. And every time you set yourself this optimistic target, and then that didn't happen, then sort of a piece of them died. And he sort of explained how some of them just lost the will to live as a result of it. And he describes his mentality of retain faith that you will prevail in the end, however at the same time confronting the brutal facts of your reality. And I think that doesn't really matter whether or not you're in a prisoner of war camp, or you're climbing a mountain, or frankly, you're doing the kind of things that all of us do every single day, and we come up across challenges and difficult things, and we're going, I'm not sure if I can do it. If you don't believe in yourself, why the hell should anyone else believe in you? And if you don't believe in yourself, frankly, you're already, especially if it's something that you perceive is within your control, elements are within control, then you're already starting to give yourself an out.
Yeah.
Athletes, they turn up because they want to win the gold medal. Teams may look at, actually, realistically, we're looking for the bronze, but ultimately the athlete gets on the pitch wanting to win. And they want to go all the way. They want to get that record time. They want to make the boat go faster. They want to jump higher. They want to run, whatever it is. And so I think it is a mentality piece. Now, whether or not that's something I've taught myself to do, whether or not that's something that I just fundamentally have, I don't really know. When I was at school, I was not hugely confident. Maybe it's as a result of some of my earlier success climbing, of getting to the top of mountains and gone, okay, it's tough, but I can do it, and therefore, if I've done that, then what can I do next?
Yeah.
And having that sense that you can always go a little bit further. You know, the growth mindset of developing oneself. But when I put myself forward for something, I have to honestly believe I can do it. Like, you have to have a sense of self-efficacy, and that is what gives you the resilience to give it your best, but also not get sidetracked by, but what happens if I don't do it? And so, yes, my will was in order when I'd been off on these big expeditions. I've given my wife a list of my iTunes account password and all those kind of important things, which luckily she didn't misuse whilst I was away. But did I write a sort of a death letter to my wife or my children? No.
Yeah.
Why didn't I do that? Because I've got no intention of dying.
Yeah, because you know you're coming back.
Yeah,
in your mind,
yeah.
You're...
And I appreciate that and I feel that I have the self-awareness to be able to joke about this, that when I get run over by the bus on the way home today, and this gets put out as a posthumous podcast for Jake, God rest his soul, people will go, oh God, he hasn't told his kids he loves them. Well, I tell them that every day. I don't need to write that in a letter. And actually, if we were worried about that thing, then we'd write that letter every single day when we left the house. Because let's face it, life is risky.
Also, as well, I mean, this is going down a very odd, but I'm not sure I'd want that letter. You know what I mean? I don't know if that would. I'm not sure that would help anything.
Yes.
Sort of by the by, but I don't know if.
So what you're not sure you would want to write it or to provide it or for your other half to.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think I need the letter. I think it's always something I don't know. I don't think I'd want to read it.
Well, pop quiz listeners, what about you? Have you got that letter sitting in your drawer? More and again, more than just the will, an expression of intent. But when you go off and do difficult, dangerous, scary things, do you put something? And it's not saying that I don't. I don't respect people who do it.
No.
It's just not something that I have. Yes, I thought this is something I could do, but I haven't done it. And if I truly believed in it, then I would have done it. So I don't. Yeah, I'll tell it to them in person.
So sorry, we keep getting sidetracked.
This is what our conversation is all about.
You were attempting it for the.
Yes, thank you. Well done. You remember where I am. This podcast could go on for about 15 hours if I take you every single step of the way. So. Yeah, 2008 came and went. It was a bad year on the mountain, but, and this is why we got onto this line of conversation, ultimately it didn't deter me in wanting to go. And I was able to get onto an international team headed up by an amazing American climber called Fabrizio Zangrilli. And we went in 2009, so got there, which was brilliant. I was 25, I think 26. So it was 5 years after Everest, 4 years after Everest. And I'm thinking, yeah, this is it. And I know I stepped off on that expedition with so much bravado and so much of a sense of and when I get to the top, ... It was a done deal for me. And that's not to say that I don't have, or I hadn't had that kind of arrogance before, because actually I have failed on mountain, or I hadn't got to the top of mountains before. So I had learnt the hard way what it's like to go on an expedition and not get to the summit. But that I think had taught me so much. But at the same time, I think when you set off, you have to set off with the sense of, I'm going to do this. In the same way that you don't want to set off with the thing is, I might die. So hopefully they go hand in hand together. To cut a long story short, we didn't get to the top of the mountain. We were on the Chesin route, which is not the easiest. Right. So I was quite pleased with that. We were the only, there were two teams on that route. But we essentially fixed all the rope on it with no Sherpas, we did it all ourselves. If I am to look back over my entire career, this last successful trip to K2 included, that expedition, I'm probably the most proud of my climbing achievement, or my technical climbing achievement, because of what we were doing, how we were doing it, the style in which we were doing it, and technical challenges of that climb. And in the end, actually, there was too much snow high up on the mountain. I turned back at about 700, something like that, 7,700. A few of the team got the top camp. A couple of people sort of had a bit of a wander a little bit higher, but ultimately it was just chest deep snow.
Right.
It was not going to happen. And that year, nobody summited.
What's it like when you have to make that decision to turn back?
It's funny. The moment of making the decision itself is wonderful.
What, because it's like a weight off your shoulders.
It is a tremendous relief.
Right.
Because up until that point, you are probably... I mean, it's not like we're not going to make it turn around.
Yeah.
It's not quite as...
It's gradually getting...
You're realising this is tough, the snow's bad, this is not great, I'm not feeling great. Like the SWOT analysis is starting to tip the other way, and you're starting to go, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
Setting off with that sense of I'm definitely going to get to the top. Well, I might be getting to the top. Ooh, actually the top's looking a little bit more difficult. Actually, am I going to get to the top? Or I don't think I'm going to get to the top.
Right.
And if I keep on going, I might die.
Right.
So it's the seesaw sort of flicks the other way. And so at the point of going, right, that's it is a tremendous sigh of relief.
Ah, okay.
And of course, the rest of that, the next couple of days of getting back down to base camp, that's a bit of a lick. And it probably isn't until you, or maybe on the walk out from the mountain, I remember waving goodbye to the mountain, and that was the bit probably where I felt the worst.
Right.
Because the truth dawned on me that I was now going home, having not succeeded in what I set out to do. And again, not to say that hadn't happened to me before, but it was such a big thing, such a big focus. And the hard work, the effort, the sponsorship, all things like that, you sort of feel as though there's a lot of other people wanting you to get to the top. Now, of course, I know that they would much prefer me to come home safely rather than risk it to try and get to the top. I know that. But at the same time, you can't help but being a little bit disappointed by that. And you have these little things that you look forward to. I've been away for 2 months, so of course on the route out you're going, all right, well, sod that. At least I'm going home, looking forward to a decent meal and a bed and seeing my then girlfriend, now my wife, and my family, and getting back to normality. But the strange thing is that, or ironically, whereas when you succeed in your goals, there can be a bit of an anticlimax, because then it's a case of, well, crikey, what next?
Yeah.
The irony is that when you don't succeed in them, what should really happen is your vision is that much clearer, because, well, now I need to do it again. If it is what I truly want, then that's easy, because now I just start planning for my return trip. But I think at the time you can't necessarily square that circle in your own head. You're all over the place. So that was 2009. Took a few years sort of away from proper climbing. I started working as a management consultant, doing leadership development. I took a year out even from that to go off to Afghanistan with the army, because I was serving army reservist. So I spent my time in a hot and sandy place rather than a cold and icy place, which was an amazing experience. A lot of similarities to being on a big expedition, but also a lot of differences, which I really appreciated. That again, I learned a huge amount about myself, and felt it was a hugely rewarding experience going off to Afghanistan with the army. And then a few years later, by this point, I was married, and we'd had our first child. We'd gone up to the Lake District. So my daughter Ottilie was 10 months old. We'd gone up to the Lake District to go and climb Scarfell Pike. Because I thought, this is something, I think I climbed Scarfell to the highest point in my own country when I was 19. The ripe old age of 19. Here's my opportunity to get my daughter to the top when she's less than a year old, in a rucksack and stuff. Anyway, we had a brilliant time, and she almost took her first steps on the top. It was very cool. But down in the bottom, I bumped into an old mate, and essentially the conversation went, I'm thinking of putting a team together for K2, would you be interested? And my immediate response was, oh God, I'd love to, but wife, child, career. And said, I'd love to, but these things I think it's very unlikely. walked outside, caught up with my amazing, wonderful, incredibly patient, supportive wife, Saskia, and I mentioned it to her, and she probably regrets saying this now, but she said, well, why don't you? And I think it was weird because I think in my own head, I was basing my thoughts on what I thought other people would say to me. So I'd sort of said no to him because I assumed that others, that she would say no to me, that work would probably say no to me. Don't be ridiculous, Jake. You've just got back from Afghanistan. No. And I think, again, the lesson from that is if you don't ask, you don't get.
And also, she knows how important it is to you, and
she probably regrets this massively, but she knew what she was buying into. She'd absolutely read the small print in terms of by the way, your betrothed quite likes taking himself off to bonkers places and essentially beasting himself doing dangerous things. Do not be surprised if he wants to carry on doing this. And I'm amazed that she relents and allows me to do it, and she's incredible. And so 2016, British team, we went to the mountain, very excited. What was really cool about that expedition is the leader on that trip was a lady called Diane Gilbert, Scottish climber, and she had been my climbing partner from Everest.
Right.
So 11 years later, we climbed. We went on the next expedition, and it was wonderful because it was like neither of us had changed. She said that to me, and I said that to her. 11 years have passed, and yet it's almost like 2 days have passed since Everest, and it was wonderful. And it was such fun. Unfortunately, we were there for a very long time. We went on our summit push, so day 50 or so of the expedition. I was up with the Sherpa fixing team. We were about a day ahead of most of the other teams, and there was a massive avalanche, and it swept away Camp 3, which is 7,300 meters. We were below it. Fortunately, we weren't hurt, but had we been in it, we would have been brown bread. We climbed up to the site of Camp 3, seeing if there was anything we could salvage. Nothing there. It was wiped off the face of the planet. All the oxygen, all the equipment, all the ropes, all the tents, everything that we and all the other teams needed for the push to the summit. And so immediately I was getting, well, we can't continue with this summit attempt. We have to go back. And most of the big teams, in fact all the big teams, said, that's it, we've lost too much. About $200,000 worth of equipment had been lost in that. There were not enough supplies for them to continue the expedition. And also it was starting to get relatively late in the season. We tried to rally together sort of Achilles heroes of Waifs and Strays to sort of mount another attempt, and at one point it looked like that might happen, and then actually people started dropping out. They weren't as committed as we were, and in the end we just had to make a difficult decision that despite wanting to do it, despite feeling that we could do it, we were sort of a little bit more aware of the risk, and that if we wanted to maximise our chances, we needed a bigger team. And we made the decision again. It was the right decision to make, to turn around. I mean, what was interesting about that expedition is that we turned back not from high on the mountain, but from base camp, despite believing that we could do it, believing that we had an opportunity to do it. So we had motives, means, and opportunity, but in the end it just didn't quite work out. And so I was disappointed with that. And then, of course, that was now second time. And whilst I tasted defeat, first time round on other trips, this is probably the first time that it had been two big expeditions. And we're talking tens of thousands of dollars invested in these expeditions and from sponsors and everything.
And there's that video of you, isn't there? It's in the first. I think it's in the first blog post that you did about this summit.
Yeah.
And you say in your blog post that like you seem sort of cheery, but you can tell there's sort of an underlying.
Yeah, I think the one you're referring to is the video I filmed as I was leaving base camp the second time round.
Yeah.
As I was sort of trying to keep a stiff upper lip, thanking the mountain, of course, for keeping us safe, sort of waving goodbye, sort of saying, I don't know if I'll ever see you, but who knows, inshallah, God willing, I will return. And I must admit, there'd been a part of me that thought, am I likely to come back? I still really want to, but is that pushing my luck both with family and with work? And then 2018 came along, and once again, somehow I managed to pull the wool over the eyes of my family and and my employers, and they all massively supported me, which was brilliant. And thankfully, third time really was a charm.
Yeah.
And everything just fell into place this time. So many things that I'd learned on the previous expeditions, as many of them were about myself as they were about working with other people or around the mountain. I was the one, arguably, with the most experience on the mountain. My climbing partner, Thomas, who's Slovenian, he'd never been to Pakistan.
Right.
Sherpas had never been to Pakistan before. So in our team of 5, I was the only one who'd been on the mountain before, twice. But one of the things that I did very differently this time was that I massively changed my acclimatization strategy. So as I mentioned earlier, normally in sort of Himalayan style climbing, you do this shuttle run up and down the mountain, acclimatizing but also moving the equipment further up. So capsule and siege style climbing. Siege style climbing that it is. And and I was acutely aware that every time you step foot on K2, it is inherently dangerous, rockfall, avalanche, etc. Therefore, how do you reduce your risk?
Minimize that, yeah.
You reduce your vulnerability. You just spend less time in a dangerous environment. That's risk management 101. And B, frankly, by that stage, I was rather bored of the lower stretches of K2.
You've done it. So.
I'd been up and down those bloody lower slopes 6, 7, 8 times.
Yeah.
I didn't really fancy doing it again. Again, it's, whilst you appreciate that it's a means to an end and it's a necessary evil, the whole thing of, I'm going up the mountain, I know I'm going to have to come back down again, to then go back up again, it feels like a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
And I'm a lazy bastard when it comes down to it, really.
Because you don't do any training either, do you?
No.
You just...
I just go.
Turn up.
I just pitch up and have a go. No, I don't do any training, and I never have done any training.
Which seems mental.
Yeah, I guess when you put it like that, crikey, yes. This is what I've been doing wrong all my life.
Clearly it works. But
Yeah, I mean, I think that again, I come back to I'm a lazy bastard. So there are times where I do physical activity, but I wouldn't say I do physical exercise. I certainly do not have a routine.
Right.
I have many unconvincing excuses as to why I don't do phys, but they are my excuses, and I'll stick by them until I'm forced into it, or that somebody absolutely explains them out of it. But I also strongly believe that you will naturally get fit in the early stage of an expedition.
Right.
If you were saying, right, tomorrow you have your summit attempt on K2, I'd be going, shit. I'm not ready for that. I know I'm not ready.
But there's so much to do before you even get there. You've got
weeks and weeks of slowly building up.
Like you said, you're going up and down.
Up and down. And actually, if you treat each of those as training, then maybe I do a lot of training.
Yeah.
So, it's just I don't do anything that's not on the actual expedition, not on the mountain. So with those two things in mind, it's risky spending time on K2, and I was bored of K2, but knowing that I need to get to the top of it, I thought, well, what I'll do is I still need to acclimatise. I'll do my acclimatisation on a mountain called Broad Peak, which is the next door mountain, which is 8,047 metres high. It's the 12th highest mountain in the world. And it's a few miles from K2, and we actually had our base camp pretty much bang in between the two of them, because we had another team who were climbing Broad Peak, and that was great. Because Broad Peak is slightly easier, certainly lower down the mountain. Well, in fact, it's a lot easier on the mountain. Less dangers, certainly less objective dangers. It was a new mountain for me. It was interesting. It was fun climbing. It was doing something different. It was seeing different things. And I did one quick dash up to Camp 1 and back down, and then, I didn't know when I set off, but then essentially went off on a summit attempt for Broad Peak, and got to, in a single push, over a course of 5 days, got to 7,900 metres. So I was only 150 vertical metres now. There was still quite some way to go to the top. And I made the decision just because I was by myself. At that point, it was a solo summit attempt in the end. I made that decision to not carry on going and to turn back. And it was very easy to make that decision, despite being very close to the summit of an 8,000 metre peak, because I already knew that wasn't my aim.
Yeah.
And I'd been very sure in my own mind that, yeah, sure, if the opportunity were to come and everything went smoothly, of course I would continue. But at the moment where it starts to get a little bit spicy, I would very happily say, yep, cool, time out, that's it. I've done my acclimatization, which is why I was on Broad Peak.
Yeah.
The more time I spend up high, the better it is. Thumbs up, Charlie Brown. And therefore it was easy to turn around and get back down. And it takes me back to something I learned very early on in my military career. The first principle of war is the selection and the maintenance of the aim. Know what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And then every day, keep asking yourself, are we still aiming for it? Is my actions and my behaviours today taking me towards my true aim, or is it a tangent? Is it a distraction? Is it something else? And it would have been too easy to have kept on going on Broad Peak. Got myself into trouble because, I mean, this is a completely separate story and not for now. But there was a Scottish climber who was currently missing and unaccounted for on Broad Peak whilst I was there.
Oh, really?
Who'd gone for a summit attempt the day before. I was expecting at any point to come across his body.
Right.
In the end, we found him alive. And we were able to help him down off the mountain. And some amazing work by other members of my team who hadn't gone on the summit attempt but were up high on the mountain, and helped him survive, really. But so he came off Broad Peak, acclimatised, ready for action, feeling fresh for K2. Waited for a few days for the weather window. We got the weather window, and we went for a push on K2, and bang, bang, bang. I make it sound very easy, but bang, bang, bang. We did it. We got to the top. So we started on Monday morning, summited on the Saturday morning, and we're back down in base camp by lunchtime on Sunday.
So there you have it, Jake Meyer. My thanks to Jake for taking part in the show, and my thanks to you, the listener, for joining me this week. Make sure you do join me next time for another fascinating conversation with another fascinating guest. But until then, I've been James Alban, and this is The Last Line.